WorkSpaces for having me. It's a pleasure to be at another one of your conferences. Best conferences I go to speak at. They're just always so much fun. And thank you all for being here and taking some time. I want to tell the story of Meow Wolf. It's a wild story, and I think that there's a lot to our story that that we can learn from with regards to kind of the human condition, what people are interested in, and why something like this, why a company like this is working right now, popular. Meow Wolf, this is a slide that kind of shows the project that we opened up in Denver, Colorado in 2021. It's called Convergence Station, and it's a 5-story, 60,000 square foot purpose-built building that has a Meow Wolf world inside of it. A developer took some crazy risk on partnering with us to build this building. And in just 2 years, we've seen over 2 million visitors through the doors and on pace to pay back the investment less than 3 years. And this is where we are today. Kind of wild to think that this is where we are today, building these giant buildings, employing hundreds and hundreds of artists in Santa Fe, New Mexico, thousands of people across 4 cities. But this is definitely not where the story started for us. Back in 2008, Meow Wolf was a group of 20-somethings in Santa Fe, New Mexico, artists, performers, really just like, kids who were just trying to get by, who were looking for a place to express ourselves. Santa Fe is like a very artsy city. There's lots of galleries, lots of museums. And we were from Santa Fe, but we couldn't get the work that we were creating to be shown anywhere in any of these venues. Because there was like a generational divide, there was a cultural divide, and we just nobody wanted us. So we finally decided okay, well, we're gonna stop waiting for someone to invite us into their space, and we're just gonna start a space of our own. So in 2008, got together with a dozen of my closest friends, and we met in a living room, and I said, all right, y'all, so what if we opened our own space? What if we rented a warehouse and all pitched in $100 a month, which is less than what we spent on weed on a monthly basis. And we all pitched together to have our own space, and we could throw parties there, and we could put up art, and we could do performances, and we could do weird sleepover type things, and people were like, all right, yeah, we're down. And at that meeting, just to get it out of the way, we had 2 hats. And one hat had a bunch of words in it, and the other hat had a bunch of words in it. And we started to pull out words from the 2 hats and put them together, and that's how we ended up with our name, Meow Wolf. Totally random, out of 2 hats. And I left that meeting that night after everyone committed and after we had named ourselves Meow Wolf, and I was just like, what the fuck am I doing with my life? Okay, I guess we're gonna start this thing called Meow Wolf now. And we would dumpster dive for materials. We would, basically anything we could get our hands on was the stuff that we would build art from. We were all waiters and bussers and front desk clerks at hotels, barely getting by already. And when we get off of work, we would then go over to Meow Wolf, and we would all smoke some weed, drink some beer, and make art together. And basically, we were building forts. We were just adults who were wanting to just be kids and messing around and building really disgusting spaces that people probably shouldn't have been crawling around in, but we would. And I was always the guy trying to organize meetings, trying to be actually have a date on the calendar when we would open our weird little art exhibits. And the day that we would open our art exhibits, I would be the one who would be running around with a cardboard box cutting a hole at the top, writing donations on the side, and just like hoping that people would drop like a $5 bill or something inside of the cardboard box. And at the end of the night, we might like make, $100 or something, which we would then immediately spend on beer. And that was basically the process. For 7 years, we worked in that way. And what was like started off as like a passion project for a bunch of 20-somethings, by the time we were now like in our 30s, became this weird like obligation for us, where we're now wondering, we're like looking around, being like, we just dedicated 7 years of our life to this with some varied successes. But now what? Like, this isn't going anywhere. We're not making money off of this. And if anything, this is like this obligation that we now feel like we have to take care of. And so people started to go their own separate ways. Like, people went back to college, people moved out of town. They basically were like, we can't do this anymore. And in 2014, I was still in Santa Fe, and I was like, nah, if we could just get the right space and we could do something like build a project and have it be a permanent project rather than these like constantly rotating temporary projects, like I really feel like Meow Wolf could like be a big deal. And so ended up finding this old bowling alley in Santa Fe. It was empty for a decade or so. And it's 30,000 square feet. And I walked around this bowling alley and I was like, man, I was like walking around with a real estate agent. And I told him, I was like, Ben, if we could get this space, like anything's possible. And he was like, all right, cool. So how much money does Meow Wolf have to put down on the down payment? And I was like, what? We don't have any money, man. Like, he actually thought we were a legit, like, I was like, we don't have any money, man. He's like, all right, well, how much money do you have? Personally, I was like, dude, I owe my parents $5,000 is how much money I have. So he's like, all right, like Ben was awesome because he just like, any good real estate agent, like there's no such thing as no. And he was like, all right, well, who do you know who has money, who can buy this building? I was like, well, I know this guy, the author of Game of Thrones, George R. Martin, who happens to live in Santa Fe, and he had recently purchased like an old movie theater and renovated it and hired me as like a marketing person for him. And so I sent George an email and I was like, George, hey, there's an old bowling alley, it's empty. Would you be into buying it? And if you do, like, we're gonna build this crazy project with like secret passageways into these crazy sci-fi worlds, I was like trying to press all his buttons. And he, 3 months later, purchased the bowling alley and signed a lease with us. And so George R. Martin, the author of Game of Thrones, became our landlord. And this was like season 3, season 4 era, like Red Wedding had just happened. So like shit was blowing up for him, but also I was totally aware of like how George handles like main characters and heroes in his stories. So I'm like sitting there like signing the lease, being like, fuck. But what's crazy about this picture, it's like I'm here at a press conference at the bowling alley with George R. Martin and the mayor, Javier Gonzalez, and right after this press conference, I was delivering, I went to my job, which was at the time a food delivery position. I went to go deliver food, we were just broke and had no experience doing what we were doing. But after we signed the lease, we were able to then raise $3 million in the next 16 months and worked with hundreds of artists in Santa Fe to basically hand build our first permanent exhibition called the House of Eternal Return. The House of Eternal Return is an immersive storytelling experience. When you walk in, you buy your ticket, you walk down a long, dark hallway, and you end up in the front yard of this 2-story Victorian house. And from this point forward in the experience, there's no guide, there's no list of things you have to do, there's no map. It's not like an escape room where you have to figure something out. Basically, you're standing in the front yard of this house, and it's totally up to you which direction you go and what you do. Most people end up going through the front door of the house and walking through this kind of alternate reality Victorian home of a family that has gone missing. And you can go through all of their personal photos, you can open their drawers and sift through their clothes and personal objects, you can read their journals, you can grab VHS tapes and plug it into the VCR and watch their home movies in their living room. And you get to the dining room and you start to notice, that there's something kind of odd about this, like something's happened here. And you get close to the dining room table, and if you put if you sit down at any one of those chairs, the table starts to shake. Like, oh, okay, something's happened here. Then you walk to the kitchen, and you get to the refrigerator, and you open the refrigerator. And you realize that it's a tunnel, secret passageway into who knows where. Or you might get to the dryer, and instead of there being clothes in the dryer, it's like a tube slide that goes into who knows where. And if there's like one thing that we learned from this project, it's that humans desperately want to go through their household appliances. It's like a real deep-seated need of ours. And I say that as a joke, but it's also, there's something also kind of true about that statement that speaks to what it is that we're doing here and why it works. Like when you're a kid and you're growing up in like whatever suburban neighborhood that you grow up in, there's such an excitement for the world. Like there's such a bigness, like vastness, like anything is possible. Like, oh my gosh, like I can go anywhere. Like who knows what could exist in this world because you're like a kid. And then you start to realize that everything's kind of the same. Like my house is kind of the same as my best friend's house. Like we all have the same kind of house and we all have the same appliances and we have the same, like everything's kind of the same. And there is a deep-seated need or like desire for there to be something more, something beyond the known, something beyond the walls. Once you go through the secret passageways, you end up in this spectacular psychedelic, multimedia art exhibit that's also kind of like a playground, or it's also a music venue, private event space. And you're free to sort of like walk and go through this entire 30,000 square foot space into a bunch of different rooms made from the hands of artists. Interactive musical instruments, like all of those stalagmites and stalactites are touch responsive musical instruments. So the cave, you can like kind of play the cave as if it's an instrument. Lots of moments for Instagram, obviously, that's like a big part of our business model. At the time, like the word immersive wasn't really a thing yet in 2016 when we opened our doors. Nobody had really ever done anything like this. And so there was a lot of questions for us. Like, we didn't really know how this was going to work. Like I once was like talking to an investor and I was trying to explain to him what Meow Wolf was and like try to get money from him. And he looks at me and he goes, so what you're telling me is that you're jumping off a cliff with a really weird parachute. And I was like, yeah, that's I guess what we're doing. We had no idea how this was going to go. We had anticipated that there'd be 125,000 visits per year to this exhibition. And that would like pay back the investors over a 5-year period. And it would have made it the most popular attraction in all of Santa Fe in its first year. But instead, we ended up with 500,000 visitors in our first year, making it not only the most popular attraction in Santa Fe, but the most popular attraction in all of New Mexico. And it was people of all walks of life. It was like all socioeconomic backgrounds, people who spoke all different types of languages, people of all ages, like folks who had never gone to an art museum before or an art gallery, lined up, waiting an hour in line to see Meow Wolf. And it wasn't based on, the Avengers IP. It wasn't based on Star Wars. It wasn't anything that was recognizable to the general population. we knew that we were going to be cool for like burners and like ravers and, you know, weird families, the weird families with the weird kids, you know? And we were happy with that. We're like, yes, we're fine with that. But it turned out that like soccer moms and dads from like Kansas would drive across the country to Santa Fe to come see this psychedelic art exhibit made by, you know, by the hands of artists. And we were getting these amazing reviews too, you know, 4.5 stars, 5 stars. And most of them were like pretty standard reviews, like, so cool, you got to see it, like, oh my God, totally worth the price of admission, you know, best thing in Santa Fe. But some of them were like beyond. Like this one where Hannah says, I went a few years ago and it's life-changing. And as the CEO of the company at this time, I like had to pay attention to this. I had to be like, what is going on with this? Because like we knew we created something novel and beautiful that takes cool pictures that you can spend a couple hours and like have a good time, but like had no idea that we were creating something that was life-changing for people. So I started to like really think about this, like what is the magic, what's the secret sauce here that's life-changing for folks? And I ended up grabbing a copy of this book that was written in the early 90s called The Experience Economy. And the Experience Economy basically predicted that, you know, back in the early 90s, they predicted that the future of the economy was going to be experience-based. This is before social media. So think about like how big of prediction that was. Before there's even social media to share your experiences, they were already kind of thinking, you know, the two authors are already thinking about this. And it basically said that like, you know, the evolution of the economy over time, you know, started with commodity, evolved into goods, then went from goods, evolved into service, went from service and evolved into experience. And the way to think about this is like in the coffee industry, you know, started with the coffee bean itself as the economy, then it went to the ground and packaged coffee bean, then went to the brewed and served coffee bean, and then went to like the Starbucks or the coffee shop, became really the heart of the economy, the coffee economy. But it still didn't quite get to this, the life-changing part. And so I actually contacted the author of The Experience Economy, Joseph Pine, and I got on a call with him. And I was like, hey, Joe, like, where does like life-changing kind of fall into your thinking? Like, what economy is that in? He's like, oh, well, you haven't read the latest edition of the book. It's like, oh, because he added a whole nother chapter in 2005, predicting an economy that was now beyond experience economy, called the transformation economy. And this is the economy basically that says that like, I don't want to just have an experience. I actually want to be guided through something that's going to blow my mind, basically. It's like a lot to ask for, but that's where folks are at. That's where folks are headed. I started thinking about Meow Wolf and saying like, okay, well, what's the transformational moment? And I go back to the fridge because it's so viral. Like everybody wants to post on Instagram. Everybody like gets so many shares and likes. Like something's happening at the fridge. And if you think about it, it's like you go into a kitchen that's very normal, very known, very predictable, like so many other kitchens that you've been in before. And you walk up to a fridge that's also very known, and you open the fridge door, and it's a portal into possibility. Like, who knows what's through this fridge now at this point? And kind of like in that moment when somebody chooses to open the fridge, I think something very powerful happens. Where if the fridge is more than what the fridge is supposed to be, then maybe the world can be more than what the world is supposed to be. And then even more powerfully, if the world can be more than what the world is supposed to be, maybe I can be more than what I'm supposed to be. It's kind of in this moment when somebody realizes that like the world can be anything, they kind of allow themselves to be anything. They drop all of the different kind of preconditions that they walked into the space with. And when they walk through this portal, they're now free to be whoever they choose in that moment. rather than who they have supposed to be leading up to that moment. And it all starts with agency. Like that moment of someone opening the fridge themselves and walking through it on their own without being told that that's what they're supposed to do is really powerful. Like that moment of agency is really key. We don't tell people what to do inside of our space. And with that agency, people feel really empowered. And then with that empowerment, they do something very simple inside of our space, which is they explore and then they discover. And it's in this exploration and discovery that triggers all sorts of happy thoughts and happy feelings and things that they haven't felt since they were a child. Exploration and discovery seems like something that's like pretty basic. Like how can this be the core of what Meow Wolf is selling? But the truth is the best exploration and discovery only exists within the context of the unknown. If you're in a known space, a known environment, a known program, a known container, structure of any sort, if it's known, then there's no more exploration and discovery to be had within that context because you already know it. So it's within spaces, within contexts of the unknown, where our mind now has the ability to do that very basic human thing, which is explore and discover. And what's crazy is like, on our phones, we are exploring and discovering all the time, like at a Pavlovian level, like multiple times an hour. We are scrolling through Instagram feeds and TikTok feeds and Facebook feeds, and we're trying to find stuff that we've never seen before. And we're like training our brains to look for things that we've never seen before. If you've seen it, you scroll right past it. You're like, oh yeah, I saw that. You're looking for something you've never seen before. And we do this like many times an hour. But then the moment we put our phones away and we go out into the real world, everything's the same. Everything's how it's always been. It's all known. There's nothing surprising. There's no exploration and discovery to be had. So I oftentimes say like, older generations get upset at younger generations for being on their phone all the time, but honestly, like the real world, the physical world is really boring. Really boring. I'd rather be on my phone. There's better content on my phone. It's kind of a challenge to the physical world to like step up their game a little bit, I mean, think about when you're kids, when you're a little kid, the entire world is unknown. There's no knowns yet. Everything's unknown. Like the entire context of your existence is unknown. So you're constantly exploring, discovering, exploring, discovering, exploring, discovering. Like that's just firing off. And there's byproducts of this. The byproducts are like being spirited, being curious, being engaged, playing, having playfulness, being like ecstatic. There's like byproducts of this. But then the older you get, you start to form that structure of knowingness within yourself and within your organization, within your company, within your department, within any identity starts to get hyper known to protect ourselves from the risks of the unknown. But there's byproducts of this too. Start to get bored. You start to like lose that spark. And it leads to midlife crises. It leads to so many of us having mental health issues. In the last 15 years, there's been some neuroscience around this. Like what's happening in the brain for those who are depressed. And there's a system within our brain that's been called the default mode network, also called autopilot mode. And this system when it gets overactive, when it's kind of hyperactive, people start to fall into depression. So like folks who have depression pretty consistently have an overactive default mode network that has been mapped and charted. And there's an anti-correlating network that kind of fights against the default mode network. It's called the dorsal attention network, or task positive network. And this is the part of your brain that is, when it's at attention, is actually counterbalancing or fighting the default mode network. The two are anti-correlating. So the more that your attention network is up, your default mode network is down, and vice versa. If your attention network is down, then your default mode network goes up. So what's happening, in our world is that people they know that their default mode network is very active, that things are too predictable, that things are too known, and they're constantly now looking to try to disrupt that, to try to bring themselves that joy of being a kid again. And there's entire, retreats and, all these experiences that are coming, that are now being popularized to try to get yourself out of that default mode, including the wave of psychedelic therapy that we see. And what all of this is doing, like being in the context of the unknown, is also where you find awe. And that's really the goal for Meow Wolf, is to create spaces that produce awe for folks. Because if you can produce awe, then like the universe is possible again. Then like anything can happen. The magic of life is brought back if you can produce awe. And awe can only exist really within the unknown. So this is our exhibit in Las Vegas, Nevada, which if you're ever there, you got to check it out. It's called Omega Mart. It's a grocery store with 300 products that are all made up fake products that you can actually buy that are on the shelves. Incredible art. This is the project in Denver, inside of the building that I first showed at the first slide. This is a 40-foot tall sculpture that you can walk through each of the levels. And at Meow Wolf, we really were searching for what is our mission, what do we really stand for in the world, digging through all of these kind of like philosophies and words and descriptions. But just like our story, just like the journey that we've been on, we anchored to the power of imagination and how imagination leads to possibility. Like this should not have happened for us. Like this is a crazy story where like it was totally impossible for Meow Wolf to now become a multi-billion-dollar company from a bunch of weirdos in Santa Fe who were digging art materials out of the dumpster. And that was 7 years ago. We've only been around for 7 years. But it was within our ability to think outside the box, to believe in what we imagined, and then work towards it that got us there. So our mission at Meow Wolf is that we open portals of possibility. I thought it was really funny that Cisco's is very similar. It's like Meow Wolf and Cisco's missions are like very similar. But honestly, like every company should have a mission that's basically something like this. Like if you're not doing this, then I'm not sure what you're up to these days. But we have an exhibit opening up. We just opened Dallas this past summer, and then we have an exhibit opening in Houston next year. Now employ about 3,000 people across 4 different cities. And yeah, really appreciate the time. Thanks for having me, and hope that this was an enjoyable story for y'all.
Look, I love hearing your story. Every time you come, I'm always fascinated by it, and I love just this idea of discovery in a space and all those concepts you just touched on. I kind of want to bring it back to this audience for a second. We have time for questions as well if you want in the audience. But like 2 things, I'm very curious as to what kind of workplace you would design. And I guess on a more serious note, I love this, this idea of like transformational experiences and spaces. I could be wrong, but I don't know. I would be curious to know how much this crowd would think of their spaces necessarily as transformational. I don't think many people would think of their workplace as transformational. And I guess, do you think that's possible? And like, sort of, how could we get to a point where workplaces could be a bit more inspirational and more inspiring?
Obviously, like, we're an extreme and we're entertainment, and we're going for the extreme here. But I think that there's elements of what we've discovered at Meow Wolf, and I think there are elements that are true with younger generations, and like I said, with like our especially internet native generations, where like there has to be those components that I put up on the screen, like agency. How do you design a space for agency, where it's not like it's already pre-programmed, and it's not like the operations of the space are so pre-programmed that I feel like I've lost my agency at work? Like, how do you design for people to like make the choice themselves? And I think that there's, even in the previous presentation, there's a lot of discussion on that as well. People also want to be able to be surprised and delighted. How do you program in surprise and delight? I think it goes beyond obviously just the space. It's more like workplace culture too. But the space really, I think, leads into workplace culture quite a bit. But yeah, like, trusting people with their own, trusting your workforce. We have all the tools that we need. We have our laptop, we have our phone, we have the things that we need. We can work from home, that's been proven. So it's like, trust that people are gonna get the work done, and what you're doing is you're providing a really amazing social space that people just like can't help but to wanna go to. And there's a trust in the employee in that, I think, in saying like, hey, you do whatever you want here, like less rules than you're used to in an office space. I don't know, that's where I'd go with it. I would, if I was to design an office space, I'd be like putting a lot of like blankets and pillows on the ground and like get your lighting right, like have really good sound system. I don't know, make it fucking vibey.
Make it fucking vibey. Yeah. That's the takeaway. Do you have any questions? Let me bring the microphone to you.
Sorry. This couldn't have been more different than Cisco. I mean, no offense, Christian was awesome, but when we're designing workplaces or delivering workplaces, we take into consideration so many opinions and so many perspectives on what the employees really want. It looks like you designed something without really doing a whole lot of market research. You kind of built it, and they came. So, how did you go about just knowing what to put in, knowing what to do, or just go with a feeling? Maybe that's a good lesson.
No, that's a good question. Yeah, totally. I think that, so, I've done, in the last couple of years, I've done some consulting with some other location-based experiences, and also other types of like retail spaces and location-based, just like, businesses. And it's amazing how pretty much consistently, like, every client thinks that you start with the architect, or like, and in our world, you absolutely do not start with the architect. You don't start with the designer at all. Like, there needs to be a creative, experiential conceit before the architect even gets involved. Like, you're feeding the architect like creative and experiential notes that they then are like inspired to then design from. And I think a lot of times we just like start with the architect, and then you end up with these very architectural spaces that are just kind of like an architect's wet dream, but it's like, most of us aren't architects. Like, most of us actually just want to live, exist in a fun world. But yeah, I mean, so it does seem like we kind of just like made this up. So, but we also did 7 years of this like trial and error, and like creating different spaces and seeing what worked and seeing what people responded to. We didn't know that we were like R&Ding and prototyping, but that's essentially what was happening. But yeah, I think that like there are experienced designers, vibe ambassadors who probably would be pretty interesting to bring into the conversation early before the architect even gets involved. When you start to nail down the why of the space, like why are we even building a new office building? Like, what's the why behind it? What do we want people to feel? What do we want the outcomes to be? What would be an ideal moment inside of our new office building? What would be an ideal moment? And be like, these are the things that we're then going to kind of hand to an architect, Festival designers are people who come to mind. Like, a lot of these big festivals, like electronic music festivals and stuff, like there's all sorts of zones that they're designing for. And there's a pretty good instinct around that of like how people come together and how to facilitate that. So, yeah, good question.
First of all, amazing story. I feel like a lot of us want to build spaces that evoke all the emotions that you described.
Yeah.
And often we have to filter them through corporate lenses that dilute those visions. As you guys scale, how do you hold on to that authenticity and that kind of like grassroots anarchic feeling, that magic, as you open like multiple locations and try to bring those same feelings out of people?
Yeah, that is the question. I mean, like, that's the question that I don't know. Like, I don't know if we're gonna solve for it. To be honest, I hope we do. But there's never been a creative company on this planet that hasn't become boring and predictable over time. It always starts off like a bunch of weirdos in a garage making crazy stuff, Star Wars or Disney or MTV or whatever, and then it slowly just like kind of turns into something very, very, very predictable. That's the entropy that we're up against. That is the thing. That's the tension that we're up against. And you need to be able to it really starts within the psyche of the people who are in the organization from the top down. So we have, the people who most want predictability are financial folks, like your investors want predictability. They want to know. And your CFO needs to know. And your project managers need to know. Everything needs to be predictable, or the more predictable, the better to them. And so what we've had to do is really find people and also train people as individuals to carry within their own beingness an to be okay if they don't know. It's okay. It's okay if you don't know all the answers. It's okay if we don't have all the designs yet, and to build a culture that is respecting of all the tool sets of the project managers and the designers, and the producers, but also that those people are respectful of the artists and the artist's spontaneity, and try to keep that culture, I think, taking Meow Wolf forward. So, we do have things embedded into our process where most people in this industry, themed entertainment industry, you design it, you fabricate it, you build it, you open it. You design it, you fabricate it, you install it, you open it. For us, we design it, we fabricate it, we install it, and then we spend 3 months on it, spontaneously doing whatever we want to it, and then we open it. So we literally put an entire phase at the end of our project cycle that allows for artists to go back into the project now and do whatever they want for 3 months inside the space. So we're trying to combat this thing that you're talking about.
We have a question over here.
Awe feels like an important and special thing. I was curious if you feel like boring is really useful. Because Meow Wolf is the antidote. I was just sort of imagining one of your spaces or exhibits being my office that I went into each day. And I feel like that might be more than I might get used to it after a while. And so it has to be special. And I was just sort of curious how you feel about boring maybe being useful to the company.
Yeah, no, for sure. And if you walked into Meow Wolf's production facility, it's not the Willy Wonka that you is, honestly. There's something actually really nice for us internally working inside of a space that is not loud, not maximalist, just consistent. And I think for a lot of our guests as well, the house kind of acts as the entry point. We call it the accessible unknown. it's not just the unknown by itself. Like you need to be able to move people into the unknown, and they need to be in a space that's actually kind of boring in order to like feel that contrast. Like if we just drop people right into the crazy art exhibit, people wouldn't be connected to it. They wouldn't respond. They would just kind of like put up their shields right away and be like, I don't know what this is about. There's no context. And so those interlacing those kind of like known spaces, accessible spaces, boring spaces with all, with the kind of more artful maximalist spaces, I think is really important. And for us, there's a whole other aspect to your question that we're dealing with right now, which is like Meow Wolves might become predictable. Like you might just be like, I'm just walking into a crazy world of art now, and I already know what this is going to be like because I've seen it all over the internet. Like how do you create the unknown when images of our work is everywhere now? So we're trying to figure out how to stay subversive, which is a difficult challenge. But good question.
Thank you so much for sharing out about your story. My name's Kiana Madison. I'm actually an artist from Denver, and I have modeled at that location of Meow Wolf.
Cool.
So happy to get to meet you.
Awesome.
I had a question around thinking about your organizational culture, and when you're coming up with these wonderful concepts for space, can you tell us a little bit more about like the different stakeholders that are involved at the beginning and any of your either best practices or suggestions around ways to get all those voices to be heard and then to process through that?
Yeah, totally. It's huge, especially, it's huge for any company, and any sort of any force, any entity force in our world right now should probably think about this, whether it's a government or a business or, even just, groups of people. When in 2017, right after the House of Eternal Return opened, and we were thinking about going into other markets, other cities, we did a few things that I'm really, really, really glad that we did, before we raised the big investment dollars. We kind of put some things in place. We became a benefit corporation. So we're a triple bottom line corporation and held to the B Corp standards, which is really good. It just holds our feet to the fire every year, going back for recertification. And that makes sure that you have environmental stewardship, that you have certain standards for the employees, and for the communities that you move into. So that was really big. And alongside that, we also then formed very early on, like much earlier than I think most startups do, we formed a social impact department. And then Danica Padilla, who runs the social impact department, then just created a whole best practices for what it means for Meow Wolf to go into another city. So when we had chosen Denver, for instance, we knew about Denver like 3 or 4 years before we opened the doors. And immediately we're like, okay, we're gonna be at this location. This location is totally adjacent to Sun Valley. Like we're gonna form a community organization, a community committee in Sun Valley to start to at least have conversations, tell us what's going on. Like we, especially being a big institution, like a big building with like 1 million people coming through every day, we had to be like hyper conscious about how that was impacting the immediate neighborhoods. So yeah, it's now resulted in it's core to our company. So when we go to Dallas or we go to Houston, like we already have these community initiatives moving through. We're working with local food vendors, we work with local artists. In Denver, we worked with 150 local artists to help build the exhibition. We take it into account in the narratives that we tell. So like the whole narrative in Denver and in Dallas are oriented around kind of a local narrative that a local writer helped us write. So we've really taken it into account. And like it's things like that I think also answer the question that was just asked, which is like, how do you fight against this becoming too predictable or becoming too copy paste. Like if we go into every community and think about each community uniquely and like actually respect that each community that we go into is unique, then our work will always remain unique. So it's a nice, like, just win-win in that way. So, yeah, thanks for asking.
Vince, I have a question for you. So
Yeah.
Your most recent locations, they're in Simon malls, right? Both.
Yeah.
Is that going to be part more of your like future growth strategies? To
I don't
try to look
know.
into more of those like empty boxes, or
It's tough.
and does that being in a mall make it feel too corporate?
You know, they just don't like going to the mall, you know? Especially, people really don't like going to the mall Monday through Friday. But like on a Saturday or Sunday, they might go to a mall, but they don't go to the mall Monday through Friday. I think that's the biggest thing that we learned, is that even Grapevine Mills, which is in a suburb of Dallas and Grapevine, that's a popular mall. Like it gets a lot of foot traffic. It's like, an A-rated mall. But Monday through Friday, it's dead, And so it's like hard, it's hard to get, people just already there's a lot of people who just have it in their mind already. Like they're not gonna, they just don't, that's not a place that they go shop. It's not a place that they do things. So it's a bit of an uphill climb. But we did it because we felt like, for one, communities that are suburbs, that are, like maybe majority of people didn't vote for the president I voted for, like that those are communities that also need weirdness in their life, that like we can't just be in like urban centers all the time. We have to also like, not always preach to the choir. So there's something about it that I think we still really love. But yeah, it's tough. It's working. I mean, it's Dallas is gonna do 700,000 people, in the first 12 months, attendance-wise. And it was voted the #1 family attraction in Dallas. And so I think it was important for us to be able to show that, like, hey, there is a way for you to turn your Bed Bath & Beyond into something that actually attracts people. So even just to put that out as like as a test case, I think was really important. Whether it's Meow Wolf who does it, or if it's any of the other many thousands of artists in the world that could transform a mall space. Because like it might not be right for our brand, but it's definitely the right trajectory for spaces in general to be converted into things that are much more interesting. I walked through I walked through a mall and like walking through with the general manager, and they're like, "What would you do if you like in this space if it was up to you?" I was like, "Well, first off, I'd have things that people could at least take a picture of." Like, it's amazing to me that in this day and age, so many people who own real estate don't even think about that. Like, that would be my #1 question. Like, what are people going to take a picture of? Would be like the #1 question that I'd have. Anyway.
Well, my kids went to the one in Grapevine, and we live in Austin. They keep saying, Vince, tell them to bring one to Austin. So there's a mall in Austin that can definitely take another one.
Yeah.
We're out of time, but
Awesome. Thank you, Michael.
Vince, this was awesome. And round of applause for Vince.
Thank y'all.